video, we are going to see the custom client, the second part. In this part, we are going to see the workflow inbox and all its functions, like execute a work item, delegate a work item, complete a work item, and see its history. Now, we are going to see the new action function. This function occurs when the user selects a process from the combo box and then clicks the new button. This will execute a subroutine called new. In this subroutine, we are going to have a variable of the process definition data type, workflow process definition data type, and we'll execute the load method of this process definition data type. These functions loads a process definition into this variable. Which process definition? The one it passed by parameter. In this case, the one selected at the combo box. After it has selected the process definition data type, we are going to use the method createInstance of this process definition. This method will create a new process instance, and that will be assigned to the workflow process instance data type variable. It's very important to check if there's an error every time we execute a method to control of the errors and take actions in case of error. If there is no error, we are going to continue and assign the user logged in to the process instance owner property. After that, we are going to start this process instance. We're going to start the execution of the process, and there will be start creating all the work items needed. After that, we are going to check if there is any error starting this process, and if there is an error, we are going to show a message to the user. At the end of this subroutine is the commit statement. It's important to have the commit statement because all the APIs of WorkfWorkflow doesn't commit by themselves, so we have to manage the UTL of the transaction writing the commit statement. Now we are going to see the execute action. This action takes place when the user selects a work item in the grid and then press the execute button. The first thing to do is going to execute the execute event. Here, using the workflow action domain with the value execute, it will be assigned this value to the variable action. Then it will execute the button press subroutine. In the subroutine, in the work item variable, which is of the type workflow work item data type, we will use the method load in order to load the work item selected in that variable. Using the ID is taken from the grid. After the work item has been loaded to the work item variable, it's going to execute the subroutine called execute. In this subroutine, the first thing to do is to set in process state of the work item. So it's going to execute the do subroutine. In this subroutine, it's going to verify the state of the work item. So it will verify the state with the workflow work item state. If it's open active ready, which means that has not been assigned to any user, the first thing to do is to assign the work item to the user who is executing the workflow inbox. So it's used the assign method of the work item variable, and it passed the variable user, which has been loaded at the start event. If there's no error, it will continue. In case the work item is of open active assign, it will validate that the user logged in is the user which is has been executing this work item. In case though, it's going to do nothing, but in case the user executing it's not the user that has previously executed the work item, it will reassign the work item to the user who's running the inbox. So here we'll use the reassign method of the work item and will reassign to the participant to the user which is running the workflow inbox. After the take method, it will change the work item state using the method change state, and it will change it to open active in process, which is that the work item is being running. After the work item has the correct state, it will open the application defined at the process definition diagram. In that diagram, the activity, the user write it in the properties, the application that will execute when the work item is running. So we are going to use the work item variable again, the activity, and the application property to obtain the application needed to run. If the application is not empty, then we'll execute the open app subroutine. In the subroutine, it just use the window variable data type to create a pop-up and open the application. In case the application variable is empty, it will execute the subroutine documents. In this case, when no application is associated to a process activity, the work with documents is going to appear in case that it has been defined to do so. So it will validate that the work item activity has the property can work with work items on true. If it has on true, then it will validate if the state of the work item is correct. In case it's correct, he will execute the work with document web panel to show the work with documents. If there is no can work with documents set it up on the activity, there will be do nothing because the application has no application and cannot work with documents. When the user selects a work item from the grid and clicks the complete button, it will execute the event complete. Here, we will use the workflow action domain with the value complete and assign it to the variable action. After that, it will execute the subroutine button press. In that subroutine, as well as in the execute action, it will load the selected work item ID into the work item variable, which is of the workflow work item data type. After that, it will execute the routine complete. And in this routine, it will check that the work item has the correct state before continues. All the work items to be completed has to have the work item state open active in process. That means that has been executed previously. If it has the correct state, it will complete the work item. That means that this work item is going to end and the next work items in the process will be created. If there's an error, for example, because optional path has to be selected from the user, it will be prompted a panel workflow select activity to select which path it has to be taken. In case the error is because it's an ad hoc process and it has to be selected also the next activity to execute, will be prompted the same Webpanel, the workflow select activity, in order the user to select which activity will continue. In case the error is because some comments are required in this activity, then it's going to be prompted the workflow comment Webpanel in order to say the user to enter the comments needed to complete this task. If there's an error, the error will be shown to the user. In case there's no error, the task has finished. In the workflow inbox of the custom client, if we select a work item from the grid and press the history button, it will present the history panel. This panel presents a list of all the work items that have been executed from the process instance. And to do so, it executes the following code. When the button history is pressed, it will execute the event history event. And in this event, it will use, same as the other actions of this panel, assign the workflow action domain, but with the value view history to the action variable, and then execute the button press subroutine. In this subroutine, it will load to the work item variable, which is of the workflow work item data type, the ID that has been selected in the grid. This is the ID of the work item, and then we'll have the work item assigned in this variable. After that, we'll execute the event, the subroutine view history. In this subroutine, it will use the window variable to open a web component, which it's called workflow history. This panel represents by parameter the process instance ID, and here we are going to pass this process instance ID using the work item variable that has been assigned in the sub-button press. This variable has a property which is called process instance ID that returns the ID of the process instance for this work item, and then we'll open the page. If we see this panel in execution, we're going to see that it's a list of work items, all the work items that have been executed of this process instance, which it shows its subject, the activity, the state, the participant, when it was created, when it was ended, and a list of actions that can be executed for these work items. If we see the Webpanel layout, it has a grid with all the elements that we have seen and a table with all the actions. If we look at the code, we're going to see in the Rules tab that it receives a parameter, the process instance ID. In the event start, it will do the same as all the panels in the custom client. It will check that there is a valid session, and then it will assign the user logged in that we obtain by the connected user property of the workflow server variable to the variable user. After that, it will load into the process instance variable, which is of the workflow process instance data type, the process instance ID that we have received by parameter. This will load the process instance into this variable. And now that we have the process instance, at the refresh event, it will obtain all the work items that have been created for this process instance using the work items property. This property returns a list of work items. These work items are the workflow work items data type, and it's assigned to the work items variable. This list is going to be iterated at the load event, and for each work item of this list, it's going to assign its values to the grid. For example, it will assign the ID of the work item, the name of the activity of the work item, the state, the subject of the process instance, the name of the participant who executed this task, the date it was created, and the date it was ended. After that, it loads the row to the grid. We are going to see the delegate action of the workflow inbox. If we execute this action, we're going to delegate a work item that we have in our inbox to another person. To do so, in the event delegate, as well as other actions, it will assign the workflow action, but with the value delegate, into the action variable, and then execute the subroutine button press. In this subroutine, it will load the ID of the work item selected in the grid to the work item variable, and execute the delegate subroutine. In this subroutine, we're going to check that the work item, the activity of the work item, has enabled the delegate function. You can enable the delegation selecting in the diagram the task, the activity, and in the properties, putting true into the allow delegation property. This will enable the delegation action. If the task can delegate, then it will present the panel workflow assigned to the user. This panel will present all the users that can receive this task. If we see the delegate function in execution, we can see that if we select a work item from our workflow inbox grid and then press the delegate button, there will be prompted a web page with all the organizational model and all the roles I have on my knowledge base. If I select open a role, I can see the users. If I select any user, I can confirm, and this task is going to be delegated to that user. This web panel it's created with a window object and it receives two parameters, the work item ID that has been loaded at the bottom press subroutine and the action, in this case, workflow action delegate. In the layout, we are going to see that it's different from other panels. It has the tree control and two buttons, confirm and cancel. If we see the code, we are going to see that receives two parameters, work item ID and action. The event start, it will check the workflow session with the workflow check server session procedure as the same as other panels. Then it will get from the workflow server that has been loaded the organizational model, which is part of the server. With the method getOrganizationalModel, this will return a workflow organizational model data type, which in this case is going to be assigned to the org model variable. Then it will load the work items received by parameter to the work item variable. Then it will refresh, it will populate the tree, the user control, the tree control. And this is going to do in this subroutine. Here, we'll list all the roles. Using the organizational model variable method list roles, this receives a parameter filter, in this case it's empty, and it will receive here the roles, all the roles of the organizational model. We'll load the root of the tree, and then for each role in the role list, it will load all the roles into the tree. When it's assigning an element, because we select a user or a role and then press confirm, it would validate that the tree code node is not empty. It's not empty and the action is not collaborate. It will get the role selected in the tree with the ID selected on the variable, and then we'll get this role using the organizational model getRoleValID, and that will receive the ID of the role that it's loaded on this variable. Then we are going to get the workflow role here in the variable role. If there's no error, it will assign. In case we are assigning to a user, it's the same. We'll get the user by the organizational model using getUserById, and then if there's no error, we'll validate the action. In the case the action is delegate, we'll use work item variable action delegate. This method will delegate this work item to this user, the user selected in the tree, and then that delegates the work item to this user. If there's no error, we're going to commit to save all the changes and then return to the web page. In this video, we have seen all the custom client, how we can import this custom client to the knowledge base, why we use the custom client, and the panel workflow inbox and all its actions.